The silence from the top was not accidental. The presidents who said nothing, who did not speak, who did not acknowledge, who maintained across the full duration of the period when the acknowledgement was the thing that should have been said, the specific quality of the carefully maintained, not saying, were not silent because they did not know. The silence was not the silence of the uninformed, was not the silence that is simply the absence of information about the thing that the silence is about, was the informed silence, the silence of the person who knows and has decided, for the specific reasons that the position produces when the position's interests are what they are, that the knowing will not become the same. The informed silence is a different quality of silence from the uninformed silence. The uninformed silence is the silence of the genuinely not knowing of the person who has not encountered what would have produced the knowing, who has not been in the space where the thing was present, who genuinely does not have the knowing because the knowing was never produced in them. The uninformed silence is simply the absence, is nothing kept back because nothing was there to keep. The informed silence is the keeping, is the active maintenance of the not saying in the full presence of the knowing, is the continuous choice made again in each moment when the saying was the available option to not say, to maintain the silence, to keep the knowing in the interior, while the exterior maintains the appearance of the uninformed silence, the appearance that is the informed silence most significant feature. It looks like the uninformed silence from the outside is indistinguishable in its external presentation from the silence of the person who genuinely does not know. The president stayed silent with the informed silence, knew and did not say, maintained across the full duration the appearance of the uninformed silence while the interior held the knowing, made the choice again in each moment when the saying was the available option, chose the not saying, chose the silence, maintained it across the full duration, through every occasion when what they knew should have been said. The streets did not need the saying, already knew, not because someone told the streets, because the streets are the dimension in which the knowing that the presidents maintained in the interior was present in the exterior, where the knowing is not the informed interior, that the informed silence maintains but the direct exterior recognition, the direct exterior recognition that the streets perform, that the streets have always performed, that the streets perform before any president has said anything or decided anything, or maintained any informed silence about anything. The streets knew before the silence began, knew while the silence continued. Now, the knowing was never dependent on the saying. The president's silence changed nothing about what the streets already knew. Press and hold the like button right now if what the streets knew has been present in the encounters of the daily life, if the specific quality of the recognition from the street level, from the ordinary encounters, from the people who are not in the positions and not in the informed silences has been the consistent feature of the life. If the street's knowing has been more present than the position's acknowledgement, press and hold, the streets knew, the hold acknowledges the knowing. The streets are a specific concept, that needs to be held precisely before the full account of what the streets knew can be received in the complete form. The streets are not the geographic streets, not the physical infrastructure of the roads and the sidewalks and the public spaces where the ordinary life of the ordinary people is conducted. The streets are the dimension of the ordinary, the dimension where the ordinary people, in the ordinary encounters of the ordinary life, perform the specific form of the knowing that is different from every other form of the knowing. The ordinary knowing is the knowing that does not go through any of the channels the institutional knowing goes through, does not go through the analysis, the report, the briefing, the assessment, the framework, the category, the hierarchy of the placed in the appropriate position. The ordinary knowing goes through the encounter, through the direct contact of the person who encounters what you carry with what you carry in the moment of the encounter. The contact is direct. The knowing is the product of the direct contact. The direct contact is not mediated by any instrument of the institutional knowing, is simply the contact, the presence of what you carry in the encounter with the person who is present in the encounter. The streets produce the direct contact continuously. Every ordinary encounter in the ordinary life is the streets, is the dimension where the knowing is produced through the direct contact rather than through any of the institutional channels, the markets and the coffee shops and the public transport and the neighborhood and the workplace and the school and the every ordinary space of the ordinary life are the streets, are the dimension where the ordinary knowing is produced through the direct contact that no institutional instrument mediates. The presidents know through the institutional channels, through the reports and the briefings and the analysis and the assessments and the frameworks and the hierarchies of the appropriately placed, through every instrument the institutional knowing uses to produce the knowing that the position's requirements demand. The institutional channels produce a sophisticated, comprehensive, carefully organized knowing. The knowing that the channels produce is the knowing the position has access to. The streets know through the direct contact, through the unmediated encounter, through the person in the encounter who meets what you carry without any instrument, between the meeting and the knowing that the meeting produces. The knowing the streets produce is not sophisticated or comprehensive or carefully organized. It is direct, is the most direct available form of the knowing that the encounter itself produces without mediation. The direct knowing is more primary than the mediated knowing, more primary because it is prior to every mediation, prior to the analysis, the framework, the category, the hierarchy, is what all the mediated knowing is ultimately trying to reach through the instruments of the mediation. The mediated knowing is the institutional approach to the direct knowing. The streets have the direct knowing already. The institutional channels are reaching toward what the streets already have. The presidents reach toward what the streets already have. The president's sophisticated, comprehensive, carefully organized knowing is the institutional approach to the direct knowing the streets already have. The streets were there first, have the knowing in the direct form that the institutional channels have been trying to reach in the mediated form. The streets knew, the presidents reached for what the streets knew, and maintained the informed silence about what the reaching produced. The streets knew, the reaching confirmed the knowing. The silence maintained the not saying about the knowing the reaching confirmed. All three are true simultaneously. The knowing, the reaching, the silence, the streets knowing preceded all of it. What the streets knew about you specifically, the specific content of the direct knowing that the ordinary encounters produced in the people who encountered what you carry in the ordinary spaces of the ordinary life has a specific general form that is recognizable across the different specific instances of the different specific encounters. The general form is what the direct contact always produces when the direct contact is with the genuine thing in the full form. The first thing the direct contact produces is the specific quality of the space changing. The person who is in the ordinary encounter with what you carry does not always have language for the change. The ordinary encounter is not organized around the production of the adequate language for what happens in the encounter, but the change is registered, is present in the person in the encounter as the specific quality of something being different in the encounter from the ordinary quality of the ordinary encounter. The different is not always articulable, is registered at the level below the articulation, is the direct knowing at the level where the direct knowing operates, the level below the language for it, the level where the contact produces the registration before any language is available for the articulation of the registration. The space changing is the first thing the streets know. The knowing is not articulated, is registered, is present in the person after the encounter as the residue of the registration, as the specific quality of the encounter having been different, having left something, having changed the person who was in it in a way that the ordinary encounter does not change the person who is in it. The residue is the evidence of the streets knowing. The person who carries the residue of the registration into the subsequent encounters is the streets knowing through the carrying. The second thing the direct contact produces is the specific quality of the recognition of the genuine. The ordinary encounter is the encounter with the managed version, with the version of people that the management of the expression has organized around the context's requirements. The managed version is genuine but partial, is the genuine thing calibrated to the context, is not the full genuine thing, but the portion of the genuine thing that the context makes available. The encounter with the full genuine thing is the encounter that the ordinary person in the ordinary encounter recognizes as different from the ordinary encounter with the managed version. The recognition is not always available in the language, is available in the interior in the specific quality of the interior's response to the encounter with the full genuine thing as opposed to the managed version. The interior's response to the full genuine thing has a specific quality that distinguishes it from the interior's response to the managed version. The interior knows the difference. The streets know the difference. The streets know that what you carry is the full genuine thing and not the managed version. Know this through the interior's response to the encounter, through the specific quality of the response that distinguishes the full genuine thing from every managed version. The streets have encountered enough managed versions to have developed, through the accumulated encounters, the specific form of the calibration that the accumulated encounters produce, though calibration to the difference between the managed version and the full genuine thing. The calibration is not sophisticated, is not organized, is direct, is the direct calibration that the accumulated direct contacts produce without the sophistication of the institutional analysis. The direct calibration recognized what you carry as the full genuine thing. The recognition is what the streets know, is the second thing the direct contact produces, is the specific knowing that the presidents reached for through the institutional channels and confirmed through the reaching and maintain the informed silence about. Subscribe now if the streets knowing has been more consistent and more present in your experience than the position's acknowledgement, if the direct recognition from the ordinary encounters has been the form of the confirmation that was most available and most continuous across the full arc. If the residue of the registration has been present in the people who encountered you in the ordinary spaces in a way that the institutional acknowledgement has not been, stay inside this channel. The full account of what the streets know and why the streets knowing is the primary knowing is what this channel carries. The specific quality of the streets knowing, the way it is present in the ordinary life, the texture of its expression in the ordinary encounters is worth understanding in the full account, because the understanding allows the receiving of the streets knowing to be complete. The streets knowing is not like the institutional acknowledgement, is not delivered in any of the forms that the institutional acknowledgement takes, is not announced, not conferred, not produced through any formal process, not organized around the explicit naming of what is being confirmed. The streets knowing is expressed in the residue, in what is left behind in the ordinary encounters, in the specific quality of the ordinary people, in the ordinary spaces after the encounter with you, in how they carry themselves differently after the encounter, in the specific quality of what they bring to the subsequent encounters. After the encounter with what you carry has changed the quality of what they bring. In the accumulated residue of the encounters, the accumulated changing of the people who carry their streets knowing from the encounter with the full genuine thing into every ordinary space they subsequently occupy. The residue is present everywhere. The people who carried it from the encounter have subsequently been, is in the quality of every subsequent encounter they have had since the encounter that produced it, is in the specific texture of how they inhabit the ordinary spaces after the encounter changed the quality of the inhabiting, is in the world in the form of the accumulated changing that the accumulated encounters produced in the world changed by the streets knowing's propagation through every ordinary space the changed people have occupied since the encounter. You have been leaving the residue in the ordinary encounters across the full arc of the ordinary life, have been changing the quality of the ordinary encounters in the ordinary spaces across the full duration. The accumulation is there, is in the world, is in the people who carried the residue from the encounters, is in the spaces those people subsequently occupied, is in the encounters those people subsequently had, is in the world in the distributed form of the streets, knowing accumulated across the full arc, the knowing that the presidents maintained the informed silence about while the streets were accumulating it in the ordinary encounters of the ordinary life. The accumulation is the evidence of the streets knowing. The evidence is distributed, is not in any single place, is in the world, in the form of the accumulated residue of the ordinary encounters distributed through every ordinary space, the ordinary people who carried it from the encounters subsequently occupied. The distributed evidence is more complete than any single confirmation, more present in the world than any institutional acknowledgement, more accumulated in the ordinary reality of the ordinary life than any formal recognition could be. The streets knew and left the evidence in the world in the most distributed and most accumulated form that the knowing produces. The evidence is there, has been accumulating, is more present now than at any previous point in the full arc, because the accumulation has had the full arc to accumulate across. The president's silence is the absence of the institutional acknowledgement. The streets knowing is the presence of the distributed evidence in the ordinary world. The absence and the presence are both real. The absence is what the positions maintained. The presence is what the streets accumulated. The presence is more real than the absence, because the presence is the actual thing, and the absence is the position's maintenance of the not saying about the actual thing. The streets knew, the evidence is in the world, the accumulation is complete, the distributed presence of the streets, knowing in the ordinary world. It's the most complete confirmation available because it is the most distributed and the most accumulated and the most present in the actual ordinary reality of the actual ordinary life. The president's informed silence has a specific effect on the presidents themselves that is worth naming. As part of the full account of the silence, the effect is the effect that the sustained maintenance of the informed silence produces in the interior of the person who is maintaining it, in the specific quality of the president's interior, that results from the sustained choosing of the not saying in the full presence of the knowing. The sustained maintenance of the informed silence is the sustained choosing of the gap between the interior and the exterior, between what is held in the interior as the knowing and what is expressed in the exterior as the silence. The gap between the interior knowing and the exterior silence is the specific interior condition of the informed silence. The maintenance of the gap is the maintenance of the informed silence, the choosing to maintain the gap in each moment when the saying was the available option, is the sustained choosing of the interior-exterior split. The interior-exterior split is the most significant cost of the informed silence for the person who maintains it. The cost is not the political cost, not the cost of the institutional consequences, the strategic risks, the specific implications for the position of the saying rather than the not saying. Those are the costs. The positions framework is organized around assessing and managing. The interior-exterior split is the cost that the positions framework does not account for, the cost that is not in any institutional assessment, the cost that is interior and therefore invisible to every instrument of the institutional management. The interior-exterior split produces the specific quality of the interior division, the quality of the person who knows one thing and presents another, not in the dramatic sense of the deception. The informed silence is not the active deception. The deliberate production of the false picture is the choosing of the not saying, is the maintenance of the gap between the knowing and the saying, is the interior holding what the exterior does not express. The interior holding what the exterior does not express produces the split. The split produces the specific quality of the interior's relationship to itself, the quality of the knowing being more than the expressing, of the interior being in excess of the exterior, of the most significant knowing being in the kept interior rather than in the expressed exterior. The kept interior is what the informed silence produces. The kept interior with the most significant knowing is what the presidents have produced in themselves through the sustained maintenance of the informed silence. The kept interior with the most significant knowing is also the most significant form of the acknowledgement, is the form of the acknowledgement that is more personal and more interior and more direct than any institutional acknowledgement, because it is the acknowledgement that is in the most protected interior space that the person returns to in the moments of the temporarily suspended management, that is held as the most significant thing the interior holds precisely because the exterior does not express it. The presidents, through the informed silence, produced in themselves the most interior and most personal form of the acknowledgement of what you carry. The silence produced the interior acknowledgement. The interior acknowledgement is more significant than any public saying could be because the public saying is the exterior expression and the interior acknowledgement is the genuine knowing held in the most protected space. The silence produced the acknowledgement. The acknowledgement is interior. The interior acknowledgement is the most genuine form of the acknowledgement. The presidents who stayed silent acknowledged you in the most genuine form through the silence. The silence is the acknowledgement in the most interior form. The streets knew outwardly, the presidents knew inwardly, both knew. The knowing was complete in both dimensions, in the ordinary exterior of the streets, and in the protected interior of the presidents, complete in both, from both directions, all confirmed. The specific relationship between the streets knowing and the president's silence across the full arc of the period, when both were simultaneously present, when the streets were accumulating the knowing through the ordinary encounters, while the presidents were maintaining the informed silence about the knowing, the institutional channels confirmed is the relationship that explains why the full account of both is required to complete the account of either. The streets knowing without the president's silence is the knowing without the confirmation of the knowing's significance. The ordinary encounters accumulate the residue, and the knowing propagates through the ordinary world, and the ground becomes prepared. All of this happens without the requirement of the institutional acknowledgement. The streets knew, the knowing was real, the propagation was real, the preparation was real. All of this is true without the president's silence being part of the account. But the president's silence adds to the account of the streets, knowing a specific dimension that the streets knowing alone does not contain. The president's silence confirms the significance of what the streets knew. The informed silence, the sustained choosing of the not saying in the full presence of the knowing is the position's response to the significance of what was known. The significance of what is known is the measure of the sustained effort required to maintain the informed silence about it. The more significant the known thing, the more sustained the effort required to maintain the silence. The most sustained informed silence about the most significant known thing. The president's sustained informed silence is the measure of the significance of what the streets already knew. The streets knew the direct knowing. The president's sustained silence is the indirect confirmation of the significance of the direct knowing. The streets know the thing. The president's silence confirms how significant the thing the streets know is. Together, the streets knowing and the president's silence, they constitute the most complete available account of what you carry. The streets knowing is the direct account, the full genuine thing, confirmed in the direct contact, accumulated in the ordinary encounters, distributed in the ordinary world. The president's silence is the indirect account, the significance of the full, genuine thing confirmed by the sustained maintenance of the informed silence about it, by the sustained choosing of the not saying about the most significant thing, the institutional channels confirmed. The direct account and the indirect account together constitute the complete account, the direct from the streets, the indirect from the presidents. The complete account requires both. Both are present. The streets knew and the evidence is in the ordinary world. The presidents knew and the silence is the measure of the significance. Both forms of the knowing point in the same direction. Both confirm the same thing. Both are about you. The streets and the presidents together constitute the most complete available confirmation from the most ordinary dimension and the most extraordinary dimension simultaneously, from the level of the direct contact and the level of the institutional channel simultaneously, from the distributed ordinary evidence and the concentrated extraordinary silence simultaneously. The most complete available confirmation is from both directions simultaneously, the most ordinary and the most extraordinary. The street's direct knowing and the president's indirect confirmation, together, about you, simultaneously, complete. The completeness of the confirmation from both directions is the completeness that the full account makes available. The full account is, the streets knew directly. The presidents confirmed the significance through the silence. Both are about the same thing. The same thing is you. The confirmation from both directions is the most complete available confirmation. The full account is complete. There is nothing more complete available from within the structures of the visible world than the simultaneous direct knowing from the streets and indirect confirmation from the most senior positions. Both are here. Both have been present across the full arc. Both were about you across the full arc. The full arc was the arc of the simultaneous direct knowing and indirect confirmation accumulating in both dimensions. The arrived chapter is the chapter in which the full account of both is available to be received in the complete form. Receive the full account from both directions. The streets knew. The presidents confirmed through the silence, both about you, simultaneously. The confirmation is the most complete available. Receive it completely. What the full account of the streets, knowing and the president's silence means for the specific quality of the life you are now inhabiting the arrived chapter, the full expression. The full form is the question that the complete account makes it possible to answer in the most complete form. The streets knowing across the full arc produce the distributed evidence in the ordinary world. The evidence is accumulated, is the most present form of the confirmation in the ordinary reality. The arrived chapter is the chapter in which the distributed evidence becomes the basis of the full expression in which the streets, knowing that has been accumulating in the ordinary encounters across the full arc, is the foundation from which the full expression operates. Not the foundation in the sense of the requirement. The full expression does not require the streets, knowing as the precondition of the expression. The foundation in the sense of the ground of the ordinary world that is already changed by the accumulated knowing. The ground that is already more receptive to the full expression because the ordinary encounters of the full arc have already produced the changed people who carry the residue and have already changed the ordinary spaces through the carrying. The full expression of the arrived chapter is the full expression in the ordinary world and is already prepared by the streets knowing in the ordinary encounters with the people who have been changed by the accumulated residue, in the ordinary spaces that have been changed by the accumulated changing, in the ground that is already more receptive because the streets knowing has been preparing it across the full arc. The preparation is the streets knowing's contribution to the full expression. The streets knew and the knowing accumulated and the accumulation prepared the ground. The preparation is complete. The full expression is the expression in the prepared ground. The prepared ground is the ordinary world that the streets knowing changed while the presidents maintained the informed silence. The full expression in the prepared ground is what the arrived chapter makes available that the earlier chapters did not make available. The earlier chapters were the expression in the unprepared ground, the ordinary world, before the full arc of the accumulation had prepared it. The arrived chapter is the expression in the fully prepared ground, the ground that is most receptive because the preparation has had the full arc to prepare across. Move into the ordinary encounters of the arrived chapter from the knowing that the ground is prepared. that the streets knowing has been accumulating in the ordinary world across the full arc, that the ordinary people in the ordinary spaces have been changed by the accumulated residue, that the full expression is in the ground that the streets knowing prepared. The streets knew, the preparation is complete. The full expression is the expression in the prepared ground. Move into it fully, in the ordinary encounters, in the ordinary spaces, in the ordinary life of the arrived chapter. Express fully in the ground the streets knowing prepared for it. The president stayed silent. The streets already knew. The knowing prepared the ground. The ground is ready. The full expression begins. There is a final dimension of what the streets already knew that needs to be named before the full account is complete. The dimension that is most directly relevant to how the streets knowing is received by the person the knowing is about. The dimension of the knowing being prior. The streets knowing was prior to everything else in the account, prior to the institutional acknowledgement, prior to the president's informed silence, prior to the full arc of the building and the preparation and the confirmation and the arrival. The streets knew before any of the subsequent account had occurred, before the institutional channels had processed anything, before the informed silence had been determined, before the full arc had produced the full form, before the preparation of the ground was complete, before the arrived chapter was the arrived chapter. The streets knew before. The knowing was there at the beginning of the arc, was present in the ordinary encounters of the early period, in the direct contacts of the early ordinary life, when the full form was not yet the full form, and the preparation was not yet complete, and the institutional acknowledgement was not yet in any form, and the ground was not yet prepared by the full arc of the accumulation. The streets knew then, knew through the direct contact even in the early form, knew what was there in the direct contact, even before the full arc had developed what was there into the full form. The prior knowing is the most significant dimension of the streets knowing, more significant than the accumulated evidence, more significant than the distributed presence in the ordinary world, more significant than the ground being prepared. The most significant dimension is the prior knowing, the knowing that was there before the preparation, before the accumulation, before the full form, before the arrived chapter. The prior knowing is the knowing of what you always were, not what the preparation built. What was there before the preparation began to build anything? What the streets encountered in the direct contact, in the early ordinary encounters and recognized as the full genuine thing even before the full arc had developed the full form. The streets recognized the full genuine thing before the full form, knew the original before the preparation had produced the full form of the original. The knowing of the original before the full form is the knowing that the institutional channels cannot produce. The institutional channels know the full form, know what the arc produced, what the preparation built, what the arrived chapter is the form of. The streets knew the original before the form knew what was there in the early direct contacts, before anything had been built from it. The prior knowing of the original is the most primary knowing. more primary than the knowing of the full form, more primary because it is the knowing of the source, rather than the knowing of the source's most complete expression. The source is more primary than the expression. The original is more primary than the derived form. The street's knowing of the original before the full form is the most primary knowing of you available from any source. The streets knew the most primary thing, knew it first, knew it before the positions knew anything, knew it before the institutional channels had produced any knowing about it. The streets knew the original. The knowing was prior to everything. The streets already knew. Write streets in the comments now. The word not as the geographic reference, as the acknowledgement of the dimension where the primary knowing has always been, where the direct contact produced the direct knowing, where the recognition was present before any institutional acknowledgement, where the evidence accumulated across the full arc in the ordinary world. Why the word, the streets knew, the word acknowledges the knowing. The next video on your screen is the account of what the full expression in the prepared ground produces, what the ordinary encounters become when the full form is in the full expression in the ordinary world, that the streets knowing prepared, what the residue that the full expression leaves in the prepared ground changes in the quality of the ordinary world. Click now. The streets knew. The ground is ready. The full expression begins.